Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoterinerd podcast, episode 101, in which Very Honored Frater RC and I discuss many things. Originally, I think the intended focus was going to be Dark Night of the Soul and the Practicus, but we ended up kind of going all over the place. The interview, or rather conversation, it's going to be on his podcast as well as this podcast. I've decided to break it up into 2 episodes rather than expecting people to listen to, with my intro and outro, a 3.5-hour episode. I'll come out with a 1 hour 45 minute or however long this turns out to be episode now, and then in a few days or a week or something I'll come out with the second one. But first,
the REAL Rosenkreuz Orden.
So I have a bunch of different segments. You can find them at edward-reap.com/vhfraterbt/segments.html, or there's a hyperlink on the episode description. If you click where it says Fama Fraternitatis, you can read all about the segments. So this is the Fama Fraternitatis as recited in the original, I think it's not technically Old German, but like Middle Modern, whatever they were speaking in the 1600s. And Frater IT, so I'm so grateful that he recorded this in its entirety in its original German, so that I can play it alongside me reciting it in the original English translation. So the English translation that came out in the 1620s or whatever it was. So for those who don't know, this is basically the foundational document for all the Rosicrucian orders. There's a variety of Rosicrucian orders these days. My experience with it was in the form of the Inner Order of a Golden Dawn system. Usually in Golden Dawn systems, they lead to the RR at AC, the Rosé Roubaix et Ore Crucis, which is red rose and gold cross at like the 7th grade. So if it were middle school and high school, then college is the Rosé Roubaix et Ore Crucis. First, let's cue the Legend of Zelda music. There we go. And I will get to today's reading. I've recited from the beginning in previous episodes, starting in episode 8, and the most recent recital was in the most recent episode that Frater RC and I did, which was a few years ago actually, but it was only a few episodes ago.
In einem solchen löblichen Wandel ging ihr Leben dahin. Aber obwohl ihre Leiber von allen Krankheiten und Schmerzen befreit waren,
after such a most laudable sort, they did spend their lives. But although they were free from all diseases and pain, yet, notwithstanding, they could not live and pass their time appointed of God. The first of this fraternity which died, and that in England, was I.O., as Brother C. long before had foretold him. He was very expert and well learned in Kabbalah, as his book called H. witnesseth. In England, he is much spoken of, and chiefly because he cured a young Earl of Norfolk of the leprosy. They had concluded that as much as possibly could be, their burial place should be kept secret, as at this day it is not known unto us what is become of some of them. Yet everyone's place was supplied with a fit successor. But this we will confess publicly by these presents to the honor of God, that what secret soever we have learned out of the book M, although before our eyes we uphold the image and pattern of all the world, yet are there not shown unto us our misfortunes, nor hour of death, the which only is known to God himself, who thereby would have us keep in a continual readiness, but hereof more in our confession, where we do set down 37 reasons wherefore we now do make known our fraternity, and proffer such high mysteries freely, without constraint and reward. Also, we do promise more gold than both the Indies bring to the King of Spain, for Europe is with child, and will bring forth a strong child, who shall stand in need of a great Godfather's gift. After the death of I.O., Brother R.C. rested not, but, as soon as he could, called the rest together, and then, as we suppose, his grave was made, although hitherto we, who were the latest, did not know when our loving father R.C. died, and had no more but the bare names of the beginners, and all their successors to us. Yet there came into our memory a secret, which, though dark and hidden, words and speeches of 100 years, Brother A, the successor of D, who was the last and second row of succession, and had lived amongst many of us, did impart unto us the third row and succession. Otherwise, we must confess that after the death of the said A, none of us had in any matter known anything of Brother C.R., and of his first fellow brethren, than that which was extent of them in our philosophical bibliotheca, amongst which our axiomata was held for the chiefest, rota mundi, for the most artificial, and protheus for the most profitable. Likewise, we do not certainly know if these of the second row have been of like wisdom as the first, and if they were admitted to all things. It shall be declared hereafter to the gentle reader, not only what we have heard of the burial of R.C., but also it shall be made manifest publicly by the foresight, sufferance, and commandment of God, whom we most faithfully obey, that if we shall be answered discreetly and Christian-like, we will not be ashamed to set forth publicly in print our names and surnames, our meetings, or anything else that may be required at our hands. Now, the true and fundamental relation of the finding out of the high illuminated man of God, Frater C.R.C., is this. After that A in Gallia Narbonense was deceased, there succeeded in his place our loving brother N.N. This man, after he had repaired unto us to take the solemn oath of fidelity and secrecy, informed us bona fide that A had comforted him in telling him that this fraternity should ere long not remain so hidden, but should be to all the whole German nation helpful, needful, and commendable, of the which he was not in any wise in his estate ashamed. The year following, after he had performed his school rite, and was minded now to travel, being for that purpose sufficiently provided with Fortunatus' purse, he thought, he being a good architect, to alter something of his building, and to make it more fit. In such renewing, he lighted upon the memorial table, which was cast of brass, and containeth all the names of the brethren, with some few other things. This he would transfer into another more fitting vault, for where or when Brother R.C. died, or in what country he was buried, was by our predecessors concealed and unknown unto us. In this table stuck a great nail, somewhat strong, so that when it was with force drawn out, it took with it an indifferent big stone out of the thin wall of plastering of the hidden door, and so unlooked for uncovered the door, whereat we did with great joy and longing throw down the rest of the wall, and cleared the door, upon which was written in great letters, Post senti vigintum annus putebo, with the year of our Lord under it. Therefore we gave God thanks, and let it rest that same night, because first we would overlook our rota, but we refer ourselves again to the confession, For what we here publish is done for the help of those that are worthy, but to the unworthy, God willing, it will be small profit. For like as our door was after so many years wonderfully discovered, also there shall he open a door to Europe, when the wall is removed, which already doth begin to appear, and with great desire is expected of many. In the morning following, we opened the door, and there appeared to our sight a vault of 7 sides and 7 corners, every side 5 foot broad, and the height of 8 foot. Although the sun never shined in this vault, nevertheless it was enlightened with another sun, which had learned this from the sun, and was situated in the upper part of the center of the siding. In the midst, instead of a tombstone, was a round altar, covered with a plate of brass, and thereon this engraven, ACRC, Hoc Universi Compendium Unis Mihi Sepulchrum Fici. Round about the first circle or brim stood Yeshua Mihi Omnia. In the middle were 4 figures enclosed in circles, whose circumscription was Nequaquam vacuum legis jugum libertas evangelii de intacta gloria. This is all clear and bright, as also the 7th side and the 2 heptagons. So we kneeled down together and gave thanks to the sole-wise, sole-mighty, and sole-eternal God, who hath taught us more than all men's wits could have found out. Praised be his holy name. Very honored Frater RC, in addition to being an old friend of mine, has become something of a prolific author of Golden Dawn related manuscripts that you can find for the Kindle on Amazon. There's the Invocation of Ma'at, the Azrael Invocation, the Harpocratesian Mysteries, the Ritual for Peace in Ulster. There's the Celtic Mysteries of W.B. Yeats, and the Call of the Portal, and Celtic Samhain Ceremony, Tetragrammaton, the 4-lettered name of God, Sacred Magic and the Qlippoth, and it goes on, and in English as well as, it looks like in Spanish, and I don't know what other languages are available, but yeah, check out Frater RC on Amazon. And of course he also has, I know he's had other podcasts with other names before, but the one that I'm familiar with is called Magic Without Fears. So check that out, and if you get to the end of this conversation and you just can't take it and you need to listen to more, or you need to finish it, you can always tune your podcast software over to Magic Without Fears, and he will have, I believe, this same conversation on an episode coming out today. That's December 15th. But he'll have the entire conversation. So if you can't wait until episode 102 of Esoterinerd, you can get the spoilers there by checking out that episode. So yeah, I recommend checking out all this stuff. And so, without further ado, let's get to that interview, shall we? Well, welcome and thank you.
Can I say that?
I think we're both on each other's podcast now, so welcome to mine, and thank you for having me on yours.
This is all your fault.
How so?
You definitely sort of got me into coming back out of the shadows into the light, you know, with all your shenanigans, streaming online rituals in 2015, and generally making a public spectacle of yourself, and having, when I finally caught up on what you had been up to, I'm like thinking I had been, like, you know, out of the scene and safe for a long time, as we all know. And then I'm listening to these old episodes with like Jeff Contreras and other people, and Joe Shantz, and everyone keeps mentioning my name all the time, saying really nice things about me. But like, I was like, oh, so for all these years, I thought I was like, you know, keeping my head down and staying out of trouble and shenanigans. But, you know, was being outed all the time. So such is life. And then, you know, you and I started talking because there was that time in LA, of course, where we tried to connect, but we weren't in the right place.
And I was drunk at Art Walk.
That explains everything. Well, I was with an old sorer, and we met up because I was there down at the California Gen Con doing a trade show.
Right.
And then we ran into each other, and, you know, I had lunch in a hotel with Alex back then. You know, I would always hook up with people when I was in town who wanted to like, say hi.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, I was really sad this past year in California to not be able to follow through on my plans with people like, you know, Catherine and you know, lunch with Ramses. He invited me to lunch when I got to LA.
Yeah.
That sucks. But, you know, things suck so much in the world right now. You can't really feel bad about a few things like that. Like, it's like, oh, the world's ending or something.
It seems like it'll probably just be a few more months. There's like 3 vaccines coming, and they're only going to be able to make 40 million of them a month. So I think by next April or June or something, things should be pretty much back to whatever normal is, minus Trump.
Well, you know, whatever it takes to change our genetics so we can interbreed with the future coming aliens when they surface. I mean, that's the main goal. We want alien babies, alien babies.
Yeah, I wrote a sci-fi back in the day, never did anything with it, but there were half gray, half humans living on Venus.
Oh, well, of course on Venus, right?
Yeah. Because it was an alternate dimension where, do you remember King Ralph?
No.
It was John Candy, and the premise was that everybody in the British royal family died, and he was the next of kin. And
Dude, I saw that opening night in theaters. Yeah.
So
when I was a kid, you know.
So in this alternate dimension, King Henry VIII had a son with Catherine of Aragon, and they lived happily ever after. And so that, of course, created a whole different line. So the person we know as Queen Elizabeth II ran a hotel in Las Vegas, and so she fell in love with a gray alien because there was no World War II, so there was no nuclear radiation in the air. So the Roswell aliens just landed and introduced themselves rather than crashing. So like all these alternate timeline things. Anyway, not important.
Wow. Yeah. As one does, right?
Yeah. Oh, man. So I noticed you were doing like a tour of that, like that you were interviewing people, but staying with, well, I know you were staying in a cabin for a while. I wasn't sure if you were.
Oh, that was, quarantine. Because when you come back and when you go to a country, you have to isolate away from all people. And
but you weren't there with the Thalamite guy?
Like I like how you say that. Well, it's Chris Bennett's Soma Retreat Center, and one of his buddies who I met before is a neophyte in the AA. His mentor is out in Ontario, I think, and you know how the AA does it. They have a master apprentice. Yeah,
like the Sith.
Yeah. I can definitely see strengths to the teacher student model, but I mean, you just know, for me, it's like, you know, you learn so much in a classroom working with a wide range of people. I mean, after what Crowley saw happen in the Golden Dawn, I can sort of understand why he was like, hey, let's try something new. Or this has worked before. It worked for Trithemius and Agrippa and all, you know, the lineage of occultism. Often it worked. So, you know, more the merrier. Why not, right?
Yeah, toward the end there, for me it was 2013 when I finally left, and there was one student in particular that was new, and he was, you know, it wasn't that he was questioning everything; it's that he was like insulting everything and interrupting everyone, and kind of like talking down to the other students from the class. You know what I mean? And so I kind of lost my temper at the guy, and. But it resulted in like everybody had a crappy class with bad energy, you know, and it was like it was a little bit his fault, but it was kind of my fault. And, and it was just, I was like, okay, I'm not really offering anybody anything anymore. It just, it's a lot of anger and resentment. So I had to like get some space from that. I mean, as you can imagine, after 18 years of compulsory Sunday meetings and, like having to.
Yeah.
But I do a little bit of coaching. I think you mentioned you do some private coaching for people going through the system. And so for me, I've been working with a guy, I think Robbie. He was co-host in the previous episode.
Yeah, I love Robbie.
And he's starting to delve into some Practicus. So I remembered back in the day, that seemed to be a favorite subject of yours, the dark night of the soul and the Qlippothic spheres and how it relates to the 7 deadly spiritual sins and how all that ties into the alchemy of the Practicus grade. So I thought that would be a good thing to ask you, because I thought I told Robbie, I think that somewhere deep down in Frater RC, there's a little boy who loves talking about the dark night of the soul, because I was remembering like 20 years ago.
Well, I remember what was shocking, especially to me in going through that watery grade of Practicus, was, that's when a lot of the alchemy really starts to kick into high gear, right? Especially if you're doing it in an order like ours, where the kind of a lot of the transformation happens in the outer order, because so much materials from the inners put into that curriculum. So you do change a lot, and that's what I think the outer order grades should be for you can up the dosage of self-development and purification as much as you want, or you could just have it like it was in Crowley's day with the LBRP, or here's 5 meditations, now learn some Hebrew.
Right.
Like, that was sort of it. That was all they had. When Crowley called the LBRP the quintessence of magic, it's because that was the only ritual he was doing, right? He wasn't doing like even BRH, or let alone things like the analysis and stuff like that. So when I was in Practicus, I was surprised that it was required reading to read 2 Christian mystical texts from the 16th century, right? Which is Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, and then Interior Castles by St. Teresa of Avila is recommended. And I got a lot out of both of them. What was most shocking about the Dark Night of the Soul was how it's not actually about a dark night of the soul. It's about 2 dark nights that happen in 2 different stages, and the comparison between them and what we would call the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries, or the lesser circulation and the greater circulation in alchemical terms, was really hit home. And it was like, okay, John of the Cross here is really discussing 2 distinct periods that you can easily see happening in yourself, going through those stages of alchemical process from the white to the red and all of that. And in Practicus, that's when a lot of that stuff really hit home. I wrote the theory of what I was seeing in comparison, and wanted a methodology to approach working through those energies. So I dived into Kenneth Grant's Night Side of Eden for looking at the tunnels of Set, which is essentially the paths on the tree of life, but in the averse or evil tree. And of course, in Practicus, you get introduced to infernal habitations and the sin demons and Qlippoth, or unclean spirits, as they're probably better called. And you even get the Olympic planetary spirits that you can scry with if you want to really go hardcore.
I think just to interject, I think shells, since that's the actual literal translation of Qlippoth, but that and then demons is more of a Christianization of a pagan Greek thing. So I could see how one could opt away from that term, but shells is accurate. So the Dark Night of the Senses was one of them, wasn't it?
That's the first one, and that's what I really found was happening in Practicus. But I think for a lot of people, it happens sometime between Practicus and Portal. I definitely think it's a necessary stage in preparation for knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel, or for the solar initiation that is the 5=6 grade, when you become Osiris, right, and get reborn yourself in that 3rd degree stage, which is what it is. And so looking at the 7 deadly sins, and I'm revising it now to be about 8 deadly sins. So that's something I've been working on for a while, because the lecture was wildly popular and wildly long, right? It was
Oh, I loved it.
And people would walk by. Yeah, everyone loved it. And I did it, all over the world. And
it became the standard, I think, for, people would refer to their notes from that class when they were teaching Practicus and, getting into that stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of trippy to think about it. Yeah, a lot of the quality, I think, came out in the giving it as lectures over and over and over again, whereas the basic essay was, of course, somewhat parochial and still is, that you can get online. And what was really interesting was, because I wrote the main essay in Practicus, I wasn't actually allowed to do a lot of the referencing of tunnels of Set or the Qlippothic demons or
Right.
And stuff. So I had to take out a lot of these names of the demons, of the unclean spirits, because they were considered not healthy things to get focus in your sphere of sensation at that time.
Yeah, I think I first heard it Power Week 99. So
and I didn't. That was when that happened, because all of a sudden I'm writing all these very unique demon names on the board, and a bunch of Adepti rushed in to see what this kid was up to. They're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "What? I'm talking about the path demon Tantifaxat." And they're just like, "Oh my God!" And they'd just like, "Okay, I'd like, you want me to stop?" They'd be like, "No, keep going." Next thing you know, all the ones that rushed in to see what the hell I was up to were sitting down in the back of the
taking notes
jam-packed classroom for hours until they got yanked into rehearsals for some matter or the other, right?
Yeah.
So that was all very trippy for me to have, for something that I had done did as a teenager, to be so successful amongst a lot of people who had much more life experience and age and all of everything on me. But it was not just a theoretical exercise. It was something coming out of deep struggles I was having in that grade and in my faith, because in the Dark Night of the Senses, St. John of the Cross makes very clear that God, or as I would see it back then, your higher self, removes essentially your ability to sense spirit, your ability to sense your faith. So it's like, if faith is something that you have, and that can be separated from your experience of magic or God, right? So there's the experience of God, but then there's the faith in God. And so in the Dark Night of the Senses, what's removed from you, and you're given in place pure iridities, right? Just these sort of empty, non-sensate experiences driven by faith. You have to keep doing the work because of your faith, even though the juicy yumminess and the sulfurous fun and joy of doing meditation and ritual very much gets pulled out of you to test and purify your faith. Are you going to keep doing this work? Are you going to keep climbing towards that mountain, even though we've taken all the joy out of it? And a lot of people do fall out and fall away from the work once it gets hard, right? A lot of people are just going on to the next ritual, to the next shiny object.
Yeah, and it's a lot like
when they abandon them.
When a couple gets past the in love stage of a new romance, and then the relationship is tested, like, is this really something that's going to last? It's kind of a similar thing.
Can we move from infatuation
right.
to true love,
to agape, eros to agape?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think once in a while in life you encounter someone you just have that true love for right away or very quickly. But a lot of the time, I think it has to be earned by people willing to do the work. And the second stage of the Dark Night, so that, like, if you look at the Dark Night of the Senses, it's the lesser circulation that occurs in the lesser mysteries. That's where you're purifying your elemental and sensate psychic senses, or just spiritual senses, really super senses, those things that make the ritual work so poignant and powerful and full-bodied. That goes away, and you have to keep doing the work, and then it comes back even more. But then John of the Cross talks about something that I couldn't relate to except through sort of analogy of what I was going through in the Dark Night of the Senses. And so in the Dark Night of the Spirit, which is the second Dark Night, that's something that is a sort of once in a lifetime experience, as he talks about it, in which God removes your own faith in God. Right. So that's the really heavy one. And I remember talking to Martin about these things as we were going through the grade together. And I remember, like it was yesterday, we were up in his room at Temple Tahuti, and he said, I think when I hit that years later, I'm just going to probably like check out, and like, it's going to be bad. He said, it's going to be really bad. I'm just going to probably sit in a basement and play video games and just drink and do nothing at all. I'm like, I remember thinking that was a really interesting thing to anticipate, but also probably not untrue. For a lot of people. I mean, back in St. John of the Cross's time, you climb up a mountain with your rosary and just sort of tough it out every day or
Mm.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
But we live in a different era, and how we work through that losing. I think it's important. For many years I considered myself highly atheistic. This is just even sort of recently, but not in a sense that I didn't believe in God or that I couldn't feel God, but more in a sense that, no, it is like, in a sense, like you're not yeah, for me it
Plugged in.
manifested in a sense of I didn't know what to look forward to anymore.
Mm.
Like, I felt like, well, I may not have gotten there wherever I thought there should be.
Mm.
I had gotten to a place where I didn't know what else I should get to. And that
Right.
was what was surprising for me,
Mm.
going through my own dark night of the spirit, which is something I really only started to come out of in the last few years. And that was something that you and your podcast and encouragement from those people like Joe Shantz, who I really, really loved, seeing what you guys were doing, and that you were still, like, that you were going through the destruction of our order that we were trained in, with the expulsion of its leader, who is of course someone who I was very close to, as well as you, and just seeing all that happen finally, because I knew when Temple Tahuti fell, and that schism between Canada and America happened in 2003-4, I knew that things would, like, it wasn't for some foolish reason, like I couldn't keep it together. It was all out revolt in Canada against what was going on with Robert in the States,
Right.
and all of that, like, well, I don't even need, you've covered that well for 100 episodes on your podcast.
Yeah, I wonder if the point of my podcast got lost somewhere in the middle of it. It was like,
what was the point of your podcast?
No, I mean, I guess the main one was to, I mean, it's changed, I guess, At the time, there was probably twofold. One was so that people who were ex-members of our order that we were in could have a place where they could come on and talk openly about stuff that they thought that they had to hide and keep secret out of fear of some powerful black magic or whatever that they thought that guy could do to them, and then the other thing was to let people know what they were getting into if they did decide to pursue, I mean, in particular that group. I don't know the other groups as well. I think you've gotten to know them better than I did. So I was kind of a one-trick pony, like, I am a master of this one particular subsect of a reenactment, sort of Catholicized Golden Dawn, and then everything else I'm pretty clueless about. Like, these quote Aleister Crowley, I'm like, what? Who? But
I think that's not a bad thing, honestly. Something I've been hearing about, like, I'm teaching on a whole website now that I've set up called Hermetic Mystery School, which is, not going to officially launch till January 31st, but is solidly into a beta stage with people getting involved.
Nice.
And hopefully it'll be more of a sort of a borderline open source, but also meant for people who don't have a local temple or an order that they want to work with.
Yeah, that's great.
If people can go join a local temple and go through the grades, it doesn't really take that long to go through the outer order or have all the 7 initiations. I mean, if something takes 3, 5, 7 years, that's not a huge chunk of time when you consider the skill set you're developing in that time.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of good orders out now where you can just go through that with more or less no bullshit. And, there's always going to be human problems, but that's something that's just endemic to all of life. Right. It's not special to any group. I mean, now more than ever, we don't need to clarify that fact about human reality.
Yeah. People are, but it's like half the people are waking up to it and the other half are really falling for it more than ever, seems like.
Yeah. Well, that's the dance. People like to dance.
So the 7 or 8, what are the 8 deadly sins?
Oh, the 8th one is inspired by Martin.
Observation of him or something he said? No
comment. And honestly, I'm working on putting it. I'm working on filming the whole dark night of the seven deadly sins, essentially, as a major, like, 8-hour video series.
Nice.
So that, and I'll save what that 8th sin is going to be for the release.
Okay.
I got to have some share, especially
Yeah.
since I don't mind talking, but especially it's more interesting than to just to give away the gilding of the subject we're talking about. It's more interesting to actually explore the subject. And one of the things I was thinking about this, because I'm wrestling with it constantly, how to convey this information and convey the same value that you got out of an interactive 6 or 7 hour workshop, right? Because a lot of parts of that kind of learning are done with people interacting and saying things to you, you say things to them, they ask a question, you can narrow it down and then illustrate an exact point. Whereas, you know, in video lecture format or in a book, it's got to be done differently. So yeah, upgrading, that's a big thing. But essentially,
I guess you could do that with a live stream if somebody were there to read to you the good comments or something.
The 8th deadly sin has to do with da'at. So whereas we have the 7 deadly sins going from Yesod up to Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, Gevurah, and Chesed, and Bina, the planets. The 8th has to do with da'at. And so the sin is very, I'll give you a hint, and the sin has to do with, it's a major sin in life, and you'd almost think that it would be included in the 7 classical spiritual sins, but it has to do with what is the sin against knowledge. Like, if I'm going to impart to you knowledge, what's the greatest sin I could commit while imparting something that's supposed to be knowledge?
Right. Probably falsification, or a twisting of it.
Yeah, and the word itself is a decimation of the name of the goddess. So it's an appropriate word.
Interesting. Very curious.
But yeah, we'll create a little hype because it's going to be good. It's definitely going to be one of the best things I've.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'm glad this can preempt that and give people a heads up.
Yeah.
When can people expect that one?
That'll be coming in the early, New Year.
Sweet. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Right now I'm just getting the bones and structure of everything in place. And, it's been tricky to apartment hunt during COVID. My sister's doing it as well. And a lot of places won't even let you have a viewing because it's COVID. And
we got in on the first day or the first week that Goa was reopened. People weren't allowed to drive into Goa from outside the state. And so
you moved there just in time?
Yeah, well, we moved here as soon as it was open, and the streets were just empty. There was like one little grocery store that was far away that I could walk to from the place we were staying. But now it's completely full-fledged open. Of course, Americans aren't allowed in, but there seem to be some other countries that are allowed to come and go a little bit, and there's Americans that kind of got stuck here, but on purpose. They had the option to fly back, but it was kind of like, no, it's okay, I'll stay here. Because there's a lot fewer cases, in this part of India than in San Francisco or Los Angeles or something.
You can fly into Canada from China, but not the States. How do you like them apples?
Wow. Yeah.
We've got a renewed sort of disdain for America happening right now in Canada, just sort of because Canadians are always looking for any chance to be like, oh, that's right, we are better. See, here's the proof. Like that really happened with George Bush.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was when I first became aware of that phenomenon. Yeah.
It's one thing I've noticed now, having done another good chunk of time in the States, is like how much that attitude is a result of highly controlled information. Like what the news people here get up here is so distorted from what's actually going on the ground down there, and
right.
You can actually testify to that and be like, yeah, it's not honest representation. And what people hear about Canada outside of Canada is not an honest representation. That's the new technocracy, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, and the internet and social media had a lot of effect on Like I remember it was 2002 when I realized everyone hated America. Like people on ICQ and on all these different
Mm.
social media things talking about Americans and Bush in the same sentence, and I always had to explain, like, wait a minute, I'm not George Bush. Like, there's a big difference, you know.
But at the same time, people would be like chatting with you, I'm sure, on like MSN or whatever, and they'd probably be like, "Oh, you're American? Ew," and you're like, "Yeah, I live here in LA," and they'd be like, "Oh, really? I love LA."
Yeah. People were either enamored with it or put off by it. Like you strong feelings one way or the other.
Yeah, it's like you've never been to LA. You're just saying that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like Hollywood Boulevard. I'm sure you've walked down and like smelled the urine and like there's
Over the
really
years,
nothing.
you guys showed me everything. I mean, I saw a lot of LA over my years with you guys, and it was great. It's such a counterpoint to how it appears in the movies. It's quite shocking and hilarious, but
some of the beaches are
well.
nice, but
Well, we had so many amazing magical experiences at the beaches together.
Yeah.
I mean, on hilltops in the middle of the night. Like we would just, Ramses would take us freaking everywhere, right? It's like, are you done cleaning the temple? It's like, yeah, just another half hour. By 2 a.m. I'll be like, good, then we have something to do.
Yeah.
It's like, of course we do. Of course we have somewhere, a 2-hour drive ahead of us at 2 a.m. for some ritual on a beach. That's just the way we did it. We were very hardcore, and that's something that I think gets lost in all the history of drama and things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like there has to be a good in order, because I mean, who would stay with a group that they were getting nothing out of, or it's like it's almost like equal and opposite, having such a profound otherworldly kind of experience on the one hand kind of made you willing to tolerate all the crap on the other side. But then it's interesting looking back, because I mean, I don't know about you or how far it went for you, but when I look at like how Fox News operates and how they apologize for whoever the GOP, head is at the time. I mean, these days, even Fox is turning against Trump. But like when Fox would be the mouthpiece for Bush.
Is the GOP a Democrat thing or?
Yeah.
Republican?
No, that's like Republican. Grand Old Party is what it stands for.
And okay, and the DOP is the Democrats, or something.
And then Fox is like the apologists, and so it's like part of what bugs me about it all is that I used to be Fox and to Robert's Grand Old Party president. Like all the people online had valid points, and I was the one out there that was either saying, "Oh yeah, we'll prove it," or "Oh, you're a liar," or "Well, the last time you accused him of that, it was different," like trying to spin it this way, spin it that way, so that there'd be a kernel of doubt in the minds of potential future members and clients that maybe he's not a piece of shit. And then so it's really interesting, like to enact it and then observe it in the world and kind of like, okay, like this is what it means to grow up and be 40 and to be penitent, to kind of like, when people say, "Oh, when I was young, I was dumb. I did all these things, and then I grew up." Like even the great sages of old would say, "Oh, when I was young, I was a soldier, and I cared about how I looked and how I presented myself, and then I grew up, and now I live in a cave," and that kind of thing. Not to compare myself to the sages, but sorry, I went on for a minute there.
Yeah. No, it's all good.
But
one of the advantages, I think, you mentioned like not knowing about other Golden Dawn orders and stuff like that. One thing that keeps coming up, people asking about, pardon me, dealing with a bit of the autoimmune diseases are a hoot and a half.
That sucks.
Anyway, yeah, actually, I've had to like readjust how I do sun salutations because I'm not supposed to do anything that puts my stomach in a position different to normal.
Oh,
so that's been a fun one. And now that you're a yoga a yogi guru master as well. Probably be like, what do I do instead of downward dog? I just can't do downward dog because even no matter what time of the day it is, it could make me like regurgitate.
Oh wow.
So that's weird thing. That's a weird thing. And you know, bodies break down. And if you get a couple of whatever, it's not a big deal. I don't think about that stuff much. It just sort of, it plays its part and I play my part and we both carry on together, merrily singing a song.
Yeah.
But the thing that people have been asking me is like, what do I think of Rigardi's book, The Golden Dawn, and blah, 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 blah. And that was one of the things that you and I had very much in common in our experience, because you joined at 16, I joined at 15. A bunch of us actually joined at that mid-teen years, including including Ka, right? Including Mimo. He was 16 when he joined and got, you know, his training, and all of us, we learned very little from books before learning hands-on.
Yeah.
And so
we got it medieval style, like as if.
Yeah, well, it's very different how like Rigardi presents these things it's all based very much around these initiations and some knowledge lectures and then some techniques, right? And when you're in an actual order, you're generally going to have a much wider range of techniques, and also every variation on those techniques that every single teacher you have thinks is useful. And then you do it with someone who does it a lot. Like his teachers tend to teach the things they know well, even as they go through a standard curriculum at times. They focus on and add what they have gotten good at. And that's what takes most of your time, is learning things somewhat well that someone else knows really well. And as you all do that together, everyone gets a whole lot better. And we so many little, doesn't matter how small the ritual or technique is you do, after doing it a bunch with other people and then on your own, it affects you. I mean, systematic meditation is something I wonder a lot about, because again, going back to the sort of sins we can slip into of just flitting from one technique to another, whatever's the newest and shiniest or thing we haven't tried, that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with fun new techniques, right? But how there's a different kind of reward you get from working the same technique into the ground. Right. And it's going to cause what we consider these days this kind of alchemical change, this kind of psychological and spiritual testing that forces us to, look at who we are and distill out from our grosser nature, subtler and better qualities. I mean, we change as people doing this work, and I think that's a big part of it. There's also a debate now, right? I don't know if you're aware, between people who practice magic and people who consider without spirituality, sort of that path is sort of promoted heavily by Dr. Stephen Skinner, and who does all the grimoires. He doesn't consider spirituality, he has said, to have anything to do with magic. And then you have Aaron Leach, who's one of like the top guys in Cicero's order and also an amazing teacher, but who actually also is one of the best teachers for traditional Enochian magic. I did his master class that he recorded with Jason Newcomb, and on traditional Enochian magic, and the technique is so different, and the whole process of doing it is so different from Golden Dawn. It's really wonderful, because it's like, I would actually say Golden Dawn technique of Enochian magic makes sense in conjunction with the initiatory tradition of the Golden Dawn, because it's drawing heavily on the format and style and symbolism of the initiations and what you're going through. But I don't think it's necessary to do, become a Golden Dawn adept to do Enochian magic at all, of course. Right. I think if you would just want to do Enochian magic, do it the traditional John Dee way that Aaron Leach teaches. And I think you could have a great time with that. I look forward to getting heavily into that once I have some space again. Nice. So there's this debate about, he believes that you can't separate the magic from the spirituality, that you need to have this theurgic process. But the magicians like Stephen Skinner and Frater Ash and Shazan, who are sort of the rock stars of evocational magic, are very much promoting a more horizontal rather than a vertical approach to doing these things. And they're also looking for, they're not looking for anything astral. They're looking for full-on physical manifestation as well. How do you like that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
like to the extent of like, you know, Stephen Skinner would say you can't do this stuff with anyone else in the building that you are in, because these spirits, maybe they might show up in the astral, or you could perceive them in the spirit vision on those circumstances, but they're not going to physically manifest in a domicile or in a building or a structure in which there's other people doing other mundane things. Even if it's in you know, the unit over or somewhere else in the house and you're in the basement. He believes those spirits just aren't going to show up like they would otherwise. Which is interesting to me, because that's not stuff we were ever taught.
Yeah, we were definitely on the side of it all having to do with a spiritual process that was, you know, a very particular process. Like
yes, we were very, very
map.
theurgic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that's very much what it is still sort of about, because there is a lot that comes with the initiations and the techniques tied to those initiations. Like, it's very weird to imagine someone doing the analysis of the keyword, which makes use of the adept. It's all based around the adept grade signs and the 5=6 initiation. So if you haven't gone through that, it's not doing the same thing. Right. It's still a powerful ritual. And a lot of people like Damien Eccles will tell you it is the #1 most powerful way he knows to draw in divine white light. And I would be like, well, yeah, I agree. And it was for me as well, back when I was like 13, doing it through Don Craig's book. But it becomes just something very, very different once you've gone through the years and years of training and initiations, and then you're doing it after 5/6. I was always hopeful that it would become something much greater on a higher level going through those initiations, and it was worth the wait. It was worth cutting out all those advanced rituals from my practice and going through a system that really flips you upside down, shakes you all about, and then puts you back together, not in anything like the way you were before. That was my experience.
Yeah. The one thing I remember, I think it was from your lecture, was that what most people call spiritual pride, they're actually talking about spiritual envy. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's a fun one. That's a fun one.
Yeah.
So with the nuances of looking at alchemy and spiritual development through the lenses, the joint lenses, it was like I was making a bifocal, and part of the lens is St. John of the Cross, but also I was using bits of insight from St. Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, which is really, I think that is to the dark night of the senses. It's more of a portal spirit grade sort of material where you're taking stock of a wider range of the facets of your soul. But what's interesting, when you compared and looked through the lens of John of the Cross with Kenneth Grant, who's, you know, they created the Typhonian order out of the Thelemic schools of thought, and really works a lot with the dark forces, as some might call them. Those demons are so specific to the Averse tree, which of course, you know, you enter through Da'at, where you just don't cross the abyss, but head straight down into Lilith, the queen of night and demons, and through Da'at, right? Take a headlong dive. And I believe that's necessary. Like, you know, like TDL would always say in the vault, you want to look up before you look down, but eventually you're going to have to face those demons.
Right.
And by using those two comparative methods of the tunnel demons and the St. John of the Cross's insights, what really became apparent was a different way of looking at the sins and how they reflect on ourselves. And that was really eye-opening, because sometimes all you have to do is just change an interpretation a little bit, and you see a whole other part of yourself and your motivations and a bit more honesty, you know, because we like to look how we like to look. And if someone forces you to look slightly differently, you can be like, oh, damn, I didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do people usually describe spiritual pride?
Well, I think that the assumption is that they're very proud of their spiritual sort of persona that they're putting forth, and very confident in it. And maybe that they judge or look down on people who are less spiritual or less enlightened or something like that. But that's more of a picture of spiritual envy, isn't it? The Venusian one.
Yeah, avarice.
Oh,
or
is envy
or gluttony. Gluttony is Venus.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But pride is
we
more
have
just
sloth.
pride
For the
is just
listeners
you've
that don't know
stopped.
this,
Right. The
for the listeners that don't know this, sloth is the sin that corresponds here to Saturn,
Right.
Bina, and the demon is therefore Satariel. And the kind of things we're dealing with there is larvae and ghouls, and the guardian of the path is Tantifaxat, which is actually, there's a band named that. And then when we move on, I got the book right here that I've ripped through with a pen for editing's sake. Here's what John of the Cross says about that stage. He says, he weans them from the breasts of these sweetnesses and pleasures, gives them pure aridities and inward darkness, takes from them all these irrelevancies and impurilities, and by very different means causes them to win virtues. You know, the idea that the virtues we think we're seeking and the way to find them is not the way we expect is what you want to hear when you're on a spiritual path, right? You want to know that.
Or a good D&D campaign.
We're all smart people. Yeah, baby. Because we're all smart people. No one who does this work is usually much of a dum-dum. David Griffin. But, there's the occasional ones. But the idea that God is meant to surprise us, right? God is always sort of a surprise, just like angels are always terrible, right? There's always this kind of shock. I see it as like this encounter with the really real. Most of the time we spend our lives drifting in these symbolic worlds of interpreted reality, departing into imaginary realms of either fantasy or psychosis, whatever your taste is, or where you're at in your life. But then there's these encounters with the really real, and every time you encounter something really real, like true love, really real, or you jump off the building and you think you could fly, or maybe you just like whatever, and you hit the ground. Anytime you jump, you remember when you were a kid and you jump because you're not quite sure how high you can jump yet, but then you remember that first time you jumped from something too high and you hit really hard and you're like, oh shit, that hurts. Like whether you're 3, 4, 5, 10, 25, and you're just like, motherfucker, that fucking hurt. And that's the real. And the real is always traumatic. True love, violence, jumping off a building and hitting the ground, that's real. So whenever you encounter things that are really real, they traumatize you because they shake up and destroy the symbolic reality that you think you've been living your life in, that this consensus that works for you, or the imaginary departures therefrom. And then you hit something real.
I had an experience. I had an experience like that where I felt like I had everything under control. I felt like I understood everything in terms of the vault of the Adepti and a good LBRP and my temple room and all these geometric figures. And then I took what Terence McKenna describes as a heroic dose of psilocybin mushrooms, and for me it sort of was like that, because I had nothing. I was equipped with no tools to be able to handle what was going on, or to be able to describe or explain. Like I wasn't like, okay, this is Yesod. Oh, there's Hod. Like it wasn't. There was nothing even recognizable in terms of my symbolic assumptions.
When did you do that?
Oh, that was 11/11/11. November 11th of 2011, out in Joshua Tree.
Oh, amazing!
I had a nice experience with my ancestors, though. I had this strong feeling. You know, the eyes, like when you close your eyes and you see eyes everywhere. I assume that happens for other people.
Yeah.
And
I think of it as like the eyes and scales of the dragon of nature.
Oh, okay. I always thought it was Azrael. Maybe same thing.
I have a very Celtic interpretation of the what they call in Irish Kapani Puka, the magic mushrooms. Kapani Puka just means puka hats, because they're named after the shape-shifting fairies. Mushrooms with a hat the shape-shifting fairy wears. And I always found it very, very instructional, that the idea that when you're on those mushrooms, you enter into the she, and if you don't shape-shift like a puka, then you can not get through it as smoothly as you otherwise might.
You have to be able to shapeshift.
You have to shapeshift. You really do on those heroic doses.
Yeah.
Which, is there any other kind of dose? I don't know.
Yeah, just like a weaker dose where you're like, oh, do you feel it? I feel it. But yeah, when you're when it's in your face like that. I felt like the eyes were my ancestors and that it was somehow my DNA. So it could have been atheist or spiritual either way. Like it was either my brain was looking at my ancestors in my DNA, or it was I was having a shamanic experience with the spirit of my ancestors in reality, or both, or neither. I don't know. But
What if, you know how we're all trapped in our own microcosms and we only see the reality of ourselves reflected back to us?
yeah,
You know that old story? Well, what if mushrooms and those other psychedelics, what they're actually doing, rather than just causing us to go deeper into our microcosm or cause chemicals to fire in our brains and trip us out, man, what if what's actually happening is we're puncturing the really real into the macrocosm and seeing how fucked up shit is when we don't have this interpreted symbolic veil? What if the
yeah,
veil is actually this really simple, beautiful, but sort of dull, sometimes mundane world that we perceive as so physical and stable? And that's what's happening. We're just like seriously seeing Cachette, the
the
rainbow.
veil.
The
Oh,
veil is torn aside, and the actual reality is like, we don't see sound normally, but the ancient Israelites, when they heard God speak in Exodus, they saw sound.
mm,
Sounds like a trip to me, right? That's
yeah.
definitely, there's a strong argument that's evidence of, you know, the only time people ever describe seeing sound or synesthesia is on psychedelics. Usually that's the main time people describe that.
Yeah.
And they were, you know, burning acacia leaves in cannabosum, which is the Hebrew word for cannabis. And so they were probably fucked up on DMT and cannabis for all we know.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of amazing new interpretation, understanding coming about old religion now that we're putting the drugs back into it.
All it takes is a knowledgeable, charismatic personality and some good psychedelics to turn those kids into the Manson family, or you know, the Israelites, or either one.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's hard to
Not to say
maintain
they're the
control
same.
of people.
Just to
Well, no,
clarify, I'm not saying they're the
I mean,
same.
I think
But
that's a big reason why the governments have reacted the way around. You know how when psychedelic studies and like psychic spies first started being
mm,
heard about, it vanished real quick, and we haven't heard that much of it since.
yeah,
Especially in the mainstream. Why don't you hear much in the mainstream about remote viewers anymore? But there's this very strong argument that it's because the government realized this stuff was so powerful. They're like, yeah, we cannot let this become common knowledge and have people understand how effective it is. So they wanted to learn how to use it for control rather than allow people to legally use it to set themselves free, right?
mm.
That's my thinking on it.
So then they created QAnon to distract people from the real conspiracy with a different one.
I guess so.
Maybe,
I,
maybe.
I mean, the QAnon stuff I've looked at is mostly like how Donald Trump's son is a time traveler from the past, or he
Right.
will be a time traveler in the past from the future, and that's the storyline I really like.
Oh, that's kind
And
of interesting. That's
yeah, it's because
intriguing.
there's these books from 100 years ago that we have. They're from like 100 years ago, and one's called The Last President. And in the last presidency, like 100 years ago, the vice president's name is Trump, and like the books are called like the vice president's name is Pence, and the last president is Trump, and the books are like The Adventures of Baron Trump.
Wow.
Yeah, and then you consider that it was Trump's uncle or great uncle who was actually one of the CIA members or FBI members who were sent to Tesla's home to steal all of his private papers right when he died with other agents,
Hmm.
including his stuff on time travel. So there's that. That's where those are the facts around which they, I think, have built these very wonderful theories that I'm entirely grateful
How
for.
interesting.
It's the best fiction. Or I don't know what it is. Like if it's true, we'll see it when we know it, right? Like, I mean, why
Well,
not? Like,
first they made reality TV, and then this is TV reality or something. It's like
when I
fiction.
start to think about this stuff too much, I start to also wonder if maybe I died like a few years ago or a while back, and this is all now I'm just like living some simulation cast forward in my brain, and this is like everyone else around me is actually not real, and I'm just, this is death, like, you know, just a fucked up reality based on the ways you chose to interpret your life while you were alive.
Yeah, or a kind of lucid dream, or it can be like
And then when you start to think that way, of course, you start to think metaphysically again, like, is this not just the nature of reality? What is the really real? Like, if there are dimensions and timelines and whatever the hell dark matter is, or in that space that we can't see in the universe, we just know so little. And that's where I think psychedelics really do open us up to asking questions that are incredibly important, especially if we want to keep developing.
yeah.
You know, like,
Well,
have you tried DMT yet?
that's the thing with evolution, is it mutates a lot of creatures into dying or being what's it called when you die before you're born, miscarriage. But every once in a while it mutates them in a way that actually makes them more fit to the current environment than their parents. And then so with opening the mind with psychedelics, you're going to end up with a lot of whacked out ideas floating on the noosphere, but also it's at least it's a way, it's a quick way to possibly open up in a good direction too.
See, it was you that introduced me to the noosphere.
Oh yeah,
right.
It was Gordon that introduced me. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, God bless Gordon and
bless
his soul. And then of course I was armed. Well, you had me well armed in seminary for asking about Father Teilhard de Chardin, the
nice.
Jesuit sort of prophet, right? And every time I would bring him up, or when the teachers would bring him up, not knowing I had such a hard on for him, they would, I would be like, oh my God, you're actually talking like, here's this famous 70-year-old theologian talking about Teilhard, and I'd never heard him called just Teilhard before. And she's like, well, yeah, blah, 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 Teilhard, ecological theology, the noosphere, the future of man. And I was like, wow, so this guy's still taken seriously. And they're like, oh yeah, a lot of his ideas are very hard to dismiss, just very challenging to, it's not about necessarily accepting what he said, but wrestling with the same questions he was asking.
Yeah.
Like, we have actually almost entered into the noosphere like he predicted. Like,
yeah, we're in the awkward in-between phase.
I think so. And in some ways it is sort of sad just to think that, like, whatever cool shit's going to happen next, we're just going to be like those sort of in-betweeners that needed to live and die to get to where things are going to be.
Yeah.
Are we all ready or irrelevant in our own time?
Yeah. We get to see some good stuff. I remember growing up and hearing, my grandparents talk about the Great Depression, World War II, and just thinking, wow, they've seen so much. But now I can look back at my own life and, there were no cell phones, there were no internet. I mean, in my early memories, and we're the last ones that can say that. Like,
yeah, we are. We're going to be those old fuckers who are like, I remember before there was internet, and people be like,
there was always internet.
How could there be no internet?
Yeah.
It's like, are you kidding me?
Little kids that like accuse their parents of lying when they say they're older than Google.
But I think, for our grandparents, like, I mean, it was a real concern. Like, they watched the dropping of atomic bombs.
Yeah.
There was no way you could have convinced them after that, oh, the world wasn't going to end in a big explosion and nuclear war. They were just like, how could it not, unless we do work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think to live with that lived experience, as people call it, hanging over your head, there was a real incentive for them to not fuck things up too much. And that seems to be something they sort of lost going into the 80s, because, we've all seen Wolf of Wall Street and
I haven't yet, actually.
You haven't? Oh,
I was like a little kid when my mom was watching the original Wall Street movie, and I didn't see the sequel to that one either, but I did start investing in the stock market.
Did you?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, well, what's life like as a you're a yoga teacher?
Well, I became a yoga teacher, but I haven't taught yoga since I was in Nepal. But I did go through 2 yoga teacher trainings in India. But with COVID and everything, it's just not the time for me, and I'm not in a place where I need to, you know, plus I let myself go a little bit. If I'm being honest, I need to get back into shape before I do any yoga teaching because, you know,
I mean, you can't, you really don't like, don't to have your yoga teaching certificate, you have to look good in Lululemons. That's the law, right?
right.
That's the law.
Yeah.
In India.
Yeah.
Well, what do you guys do in Goa? Because Goa is actually a place I got yearly invitations to tour by a record label out there from 2007 to 2011, and I never went. And
Well,
I always regret that.
here's something interesting. I mean, I'll answer that, but first, we drive by every day, or I walk by if I'm on my way to the store. Or I ride my bike. This statue of this crazy, like he's this man waving his arms like he's doing some kind of magic, and there's a woman cowering on the ground, and I've always been like, what the fuck, you know, like what is that? And it's Abe. I finally looked it up. It's Abe Faria. Let me double check that. And Abe Faria, Abbefaria. So he's a Portuguese guy who's born in Candolim, which is the part of Goa that I'm in right now. That's where we live. That's why there's a statue of him. And but he went on to like take Mesmer's work and improve it and make it more about suggestion and command rather than animal magnetism. So he basically was like a proto-hypnotist. But apparently he was doing it like some kind of like crazed exorcist while people were cowering on the ground, at least if judging from the statue. So that's fun. But yeah, no, we like the old Portuguese. I think a lot of people come to Goa and they try to ignore, like they just see the Portuguese stuff and they think colonialism, and that's bad. Colonialism's bad. You know, I mean, it's not all good, obviously, but there's an old Portuguese feel here that, like, if you're open to the Catholicism of it and the Portugueseness of it, then it kind of accentuates the beauty of Goa. But a lot of people come to Goa and try to ignore it and just see Goa as a party town. But there are those neighborhoods and there's a lot of tourism, but then there's like other neighborhoods, and I don't know, it's very beautiful that, you know, there's the ocean, but then there's the casino boats. So there's a whole spectrum of phenomena happening in Goa. It used to be 92% Catholic 70 years ago, and then it became part of India. And then now it's 40% Catholic and 60% Hindu or something like that. So it's probably the only place in the world where you'll find old churches and new Hindu temples. So like
That's amazing.
The Hindu
sort of
temples
perfect for you.
Yeah, it's great. It's really interesting. I mean, I dig the vibe here, but you know, I know there's people who are allergic to anything European that they find in you know, outside of Europe. But I mean, it does kind of have that homey feel of being a little bit like having the Spanish missions around in California, but not Spanish, Portuguese, and also not California, India. So it's like, and also not desert tropical. So it's like a very sort of alternate dimension to where I was, you know, like for the first 40 years of my life in the California desert.
Yeah, Pasadena boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a classic breed. You're a
One day.
classic breed, a purebred. Came up the grapevine. This one's going for a very, very steep price. Shall we? Seems like we're naturally flowing in through the format of filling in convo between the 7 deadly sins. So here's another sin.
Yeah. So that was Saturn.
Envy.
Saturn is avarice.
Envy. Saturn is sloth because
Saturn
it's
is sloth.
Yeah, and this isn't my opinion. This is God's opinion. I'm just the vessel, right? So
right. Yeah.
I'm always right.
Of course.
Envy corresponds to Jupiter. Envy, and what you have there is also the demons, the breakers and pieces, which cause. It's interesting. They cause on a global scale the breakdown of countries, a communal disturbance through the Geshekla or the Akshekla, and also national breakings apart. That's something that they see as coming from envy, but microcosmically it causes uprightness and jealous conceit, symbolized by the phallus, a she, which is the same numerical value. And so that's how some of these things were tied together, was through gematria, of course, as we love to do. And so some, however, progressed. One thing I said was, regarding the speed of it, an initiate progresses through the elemental grades of initiation and completes the lesser circulation. St. John of the Cross addresses the two circumstances of spiritual progress. Many initiates who go quickly struggle with lesser aptitudes of spiritual qualities and skills, and often therefore utilize the knowledge and tools of Hermeticism to aid the development of their magical skills. Some, however, progress slower for the sake of not losing sight of others and leaving them behind. So some people will just, stay with their class. They don't want to move ahead. That was a struggle for me, I know, at some points, where it's like you want to stay in the same class as your friends, but not progress. And John of the Cross says they resemble who are softly nurtured and who run fretfully away from everything that is hard and take offense at the cross, wherein consist the delights of the spirit. Yeah, that's sort of interesting, I think. The other line is, and if charity has envy, it is holy envy, comprising grief at not having the virtues of others, yet also joy because others have them, and delight when others outstrip us in the service of God, wherein we are so remiss. So envy is a tricky, sort of interesting one that is sort of a double-edged sword when it comes to St. John of the Cross's interpretation. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So are you back in action with Esoterinerd podcast? And I don't know much about your other podcasts, but are you going to be doing this more? Are you going to?
A bit. I mean, now that I have,
sort of seemed like you might have vanished and just. I mean, you told me very distinctly, I think about four years ago now, that I needed to do what I'm doing, essentially. So I hope you don't mind all this shit I've done. Yeah, you were sort of like, look, man,
I don't mind at all.
Running out of steam, and I think the world could use a bit of what you have to offer. And I was like, really? I don't think so. I don't think the world
did I say that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh good.
Trust me. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if someone like you, because my issue was around the vow. I had concerns with the vow.
Right.
And you explained to me this loophole you had found in it.
They made me a chief. People,
right, as was I. So you explained this loophole, and you're like, well, okay. And I was like, if you say so. And you're right though about
I try to avoid
the way I think about
naming names and showing, like anyone that would maybe not want to have their identity, or have people know it. Like there's one aspect of the vow I generally try to respect, but as far as the knowledge of things that have been published in books for over 100 years ago, like, come on, if I can explain something that's written in a book in a way that will help people understand it, I'm not gonna, okay, at one time I wouldn't have done that because that was against my vow, but come on. and sharing of experiences, like you're not supposed to share anything that goes on in the order. Like, okay, there's a few things that people need to know about, that went on in the order.
Exactly.
I interpret the oath,
If leaders of magical orders were less douchey sometimes, then there wouldn't need to be people like us who are now sort of independent and out there and just sharing our lived experience. Like, this is my lived experience, and I think you should know it from we're also, because we've seen horrible things done to people we love, and as much honestly, magical orders should be grateful that people like us recommend them at all, because of the shenanigans that can go on, and people in there can take advantage of you and ruin your life. You have to go there. You may be hoodwinked at your initiation, but the rest of the time you should have your eyes wide fucking open, and really maintain your personal and spiritual boundaries, and really only allow, as much as you're going to be pushed and challenged, don't give away your power. And that's something Ramses would always say to me, like, don't give away your power, man.
Yeah, that's true. He was good. It was nice to have him there as a buffer.
And he was who I think most people thought ran the whole international order, because he was the one teaching
Yeah,
everyone,
then
along with a
the
slew
wacky
of
used
other
car
very
salesman would
skilled
show up
adepts.
once a year and confuse
Yeah,
everybody.
I mean, we sort of had it good, because unlike, you know, like you could have our guy, like, and you sort of have these big figureheads. A lot of the, like, there's leaders of orders out there right now, of good orders, who haven't even gone through the initiations. I mean, that's sort of okay, because Mathers, Westcott, and Woodman, I don't think ever went through the initiations either. They were just sort of like, we're applying our master mason status.
Well,
and
who
our
initiated
initiations.
Melchizedek, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, the true initiations, I mean, I remember once when I was struggling, and I was told, look, you could just go off and be an adept of the world. You don't need to stay as an adept of this order. I'm like, well, I love the temple and I love our order. And of course I was just struggling with some of the BS.
Well, and it's the social
Zinky
circle
Pie was putting us through.
the social world you live in, to have you know, friends all over the world that you have a secret with, you know, versus like knowing nobody. You know, especially back in the day when people were expected to stop talking to you when you got kicked out. Like, that was some kind of like voodoo, you know, like.
I mean, that was towards the end for me, when I started hearing stuff like, wait, if because Martin was pulling my mom and sister to leave and just work with him and Zaleski out in Montreal, and I was like, you're trying to convince my family members to cut me out and work with you, right? And then you had Zinc on the other hand telling me if they went and worked with Martin, I wasn't allowed to see them again. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And that was the beginning of the end for the Canadian connection to the Golden Dawn International. And I mean, most of the time that stuff didn't really rear its ugly head, because again, we had such a large international order and so many people were involved that you really didn't, you know, if there was a bit of gunk in the water, you're like, well, I'm camping, I'll drink it, you know.
yeah
Because I'm out in the wilderness and I'm forging new paths, and it's like, so there's some bit of ash from the fire in my food. Doesn't matter.
I think it was definitely a different experience in California versus Chicago or Canada or maybe Texas. Like, whenever there was like a different figurehead that maybe was, you know, a philosophus or portal that had a good intention, and they would start a sanctuary and turn it into a temple, then you'd end up with like however many members there, kind of blissfully unaware of the shenanigans going on between California and Washington, you know, so I don't know. I mean, it's good. I guess.
For what I mean, we covered this last time you and I spoke on a podcast, which was 3 years ago. Time flies. And actually, we did do a podcast a year. Yeah, 3. Well, you like you said, you passed the baton to me, and we're like, "Yo, run!" Yeah. And I fucking was like, "No, thank you." And next thing, but you know, over the next like year or two, I was just touching in more and more often with my higher self, and I knew things were going to change, right? I needed to do some things that I did, and I just didn't know how I wanted to relate to the occult world again for a long time, right? You know, and you need those wounds to heal.
It's healthy, I think, to do it in one's own terms, you know.
I wasn't sure what that should look like. I knew it needed to have something to do with the Celtic mysteries, which was always my love, because I came into the Golden Dawn out of, you know, Celtic paganism, right? I didn't have my conversion experience to Christ until I was in the portal.
Same here. I started with DCWA, Druidic Craft of the Wise of America, and I got kicked out of that because my mom and I were in Golden Dawn. They found out, they kicked us out.
We liked to be very exclusionary back then, right? We used to not initiate. We wouldn't let OTO or Thelemites into our order, right? And that was a big deal, because a lot of them were like, "Why? We want to learn magic."
I got that changed in 2006, I think.
Did you guys change that?
Yeah,
there was you did change that.
There was this this couple that was Yeah, they didn't want to resign their membership even. They wanted to still go to OTO and go through Golden Dawn, and I called up PDR.
And you know what? I think if we had known more about the OTO and Thelema, then we wouldn't have had a problem with it, because something Lon explained to me was like, look, this is a religion. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, this is a religion. And in Belfast, when I was living at an Oasis, I was like asked to teach there, and I did teach a bit, and showed them ritual work and gave them history lectures. And I was like, why is this something, why don't you have this already happening? They're like, because that's not what we're about. I was like, you're not about teaching magic? They're like, no. The AA adepts there were really cool Irish dudes, and they were like, no, that's not what our organization is. I was like, Jesus, we've been grossly misled to, because there was just all this vile, disregard and hatred towards Aleister Crowley and anything to do with the man. And we didn't take a critical look at it and actually see the full story.
Right.
Also, a lot of books on Crowley hadn't come out at that point. We know so much more. I mean, the esoteric field in the last 20 years has just exploded academically, popularly, and the orders, there's so many orders now you can't even.
Yeah, it's interesting watching it from a distance and kind of feeling like the old fogey who's, like or a little bit like Al Bundy, like I was a big deal in the late 90s, little bit for a minute.
That's right,
according to a few people.
But dude, can you when I just did Jason Augustus Newcomb's podcast, which is like a video one, that episode's coming soon. It's focusing on my work in the Celtic mysteries. That's coming along nicely, despite this COVID hiatus. And he assumed that Tahuti and we were sort of a small order. No one really that without many members.
It was amazing.
Oh, no, that was the opposite of the problem. We had so many members because we didn't really have much of an admission barrier. We certainly didn't have phone call interviews and all these sort of things that you had to go through. I mean, I did because I was 15, but like,
yeah,
if you were an adult, you could send in an application and your initiation fee and show up, and that was good. And could you imagine if starting in the late 90s we had initiated OTO and Thelemic people? We would have been so large, it would have been stupid. And OTO people can get along fine, I think, in Golden Dawn temples, as long as they keep their religion to themselves, just like everyone else needs to, right? Like you can't be like always talking about Jesus if you want to like get along in your outer order classes, right? You can't always you can't always say, oh, I don't want to say Lord of the Universe, I want to say Triple Goddess. Like, well, sorry, like we wouldn't even allow, we want uniformity in the temple. And this is something I've talked about theoretically as far as the methodology of the way our magical system works for training our sphere of sensation and astral senses. I mean, that's something I think that's very interesting about the way the Golden Dawn went about that in its system. But if you keep that religious point of view, and like Aleister Crowley's your saint, according to Lon. And so if I was like, who cares? Who cares if someone is a Thelemite and wants to learn ritual magic? Like, there's nothing, even in our order, there would have been nothing, even in our inner order, which was more on the Catholic side. Still, people, we like to emphasize the Catholic stuff because we brought in a lot of the Latin, but that's just like, that's grimoire stuff, man. Like all the grimoire workers are doing Incenso Misturate, right? And Asperges Me, like they're all doing that quite heavily, right? So, the fact that we also had the Credo in Unum Deum Patrum Omnipotentum, like that's just a tiny little addition. When people actually then, especially in the last couple of years, have been doing ritual work with me in Europe and then teaching in America, they were always very surprised. They're like, I thought you were a Christian. I'm like, yeah, so I'm sort of a Christian priest. But then they see me, they're like, well, all the invocations we're doing are for like Horus, Osiris, Isis, and then once in a while you'll do Azrael, and then like I was like, yeah, they're like, these are all Egyptian gods.
Oh, let me reassure you, I'm doing it in a condescending way.
yeah.
I mean, they are ultimately destroyed by the God of Israel, if you catch my drift. But we wear them like clothes because they're just flesh bags, like Nathaniel after the Armenians.
No, it's so heavily like. is so heavily Egyptian. The 5-6 initiation, especially.
Yeah.
You couldn't ever convince anyone that that's a Christian ritual. Like if you showed that to if you showed that to a good Catholic churchgoer or a good Anglican or heaven forbid an
but if you show them
evangelical,
the whipping and the crucifixion part, like you could convince them that it's some kind of weird Christian cult.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Man. Yeah, join the Golden Dawn. You'll get whipped.
Yeah,
that actually is probably the best advert we could ever make.
The box was probably one of the best parts, one of the best initiations. That in combination with the vault.
If initiation occurs through, as we say, the fires of test and trial, whether you're in an order or even, heaven forbid, struggling with self-initiation, I think that is the common denominator. What do the tetrahedrons, the red tetrahedrons, atop of the two pillars of Yachin and Boaz, in the hall of two truths, what do they symbolize? The fires of test and trial. And whether, no matter what group you're in, that the key to transformation of your alembic through the mysteries, it surely must be that, right? What's the thing that unites force and form into that ascending middle pillar of consciousness as the serpent winds up our spinal column and explodes in a ball of light above us, connecting us to the infinite and before falling back to earth? That whole alchemical circulation is defined by these red tetrahedrons atop the pillars, and we call them the fires of test and trial. So there's no greater test and trial in my that I've experienced in a ritual environment other than more than the box.
Yeah.
The process leading up to being invited to an initiation and being told you're ready, that can be more harrowing. What you're put through before that should be challenging. Should be challenging, just challenging enough to initiate you, right? And I think the old Christian saying is a good litmus test for whether or not you're applying too much test and trial to someone. Older orders would say, all that matters is that you pass the theory exam and then you're ready. It's not our job to gauge your alchemical or spiritual progress.
Maybe up to
some other orders. Some other orders like ours are sort of gauging your alchemical progress the whole way along. A lot of that, I think, is due just to logistics. Like in the olden days, if an order was very small and people didn't get to see each other all that much, well, you didn't have much time to really give each other that much spiritual direction or guidance or oversight. But if you're in the alembic at a full-time functioning temple, like some of ours were, and some of us got to experience, well, you can't really separate the alchemy from everything else that's going on. You're going to observe each other. You're going to have people be, who have been through similar struggles. It's not a matter of theory or how much theory I know. If I'm showing up to Marcel's house at 3 a.m. in tears, going through some massive spiritual crisis brought on by insane amounts of ritual work and theurgy in the temple. And then that gets taken into my personal life. And next thing you know is I need to get some advice, and you can explain what you're going through, and you can explain it to someone who's actually then able to say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And
then you get to have that conversation, and then you get to have that guidance. And that's such a powerful thing for preparation for initiation. But as far as strict things you go through in ceremony, yeah, nothing's more fucked up than the box.
I enjoyed it quite a bit. I enjoyed it when it was quiet, or the music was a little obnoxious at times, but once I could hear everybody talking and laughing in the next room, I was a little bit annoyed. And I was kind of jealous.
I never got that.
Yeah, I was jealous because they were having fun without me, But yeah, most of the time, I don't know. I was just in a good place with it, I guess.
Yeah, I often wonder if it spoils it to talk about stuff like that, things that I didn't know it was coming. So
I knew it was coming because I had read the canons, and the canons make reference to box time, that you have to do so many hours in the box if you sleep with your students and so on and so forth. And so I knew there was a box.
That was something added years later, brother.
Right,
That was,
right,
I think they added that because of you.
No, that was my mom's boyfriend.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Larry.
No, I never heard of that.
He was sleeping with all his Practicus students.
Yeah, yeah, you know, there is something like I've always been, I don't know, it's magic, and the Golden Dawn does not handle sexuality very well. That's
or at
one
all.
thing I will say about it.
Yeah.
Or psychedelics or entheogens at all. And to me, that makes sense. Like, save that stuff for like a more tight community, like the inner order, whatever inner order you're joining. If you want to get into that stuff, that's the choice. Almost like a classical sphere group, because it's not for everyone, and you don't want to make it like regulatory. Pardon me. Develop that whole gastroesophageal disease, which is really, really fun. Anyway, I don't think that that stuff was there when I was like, I could really see things changing, like what the problems that led to the schism between Canada and America, they did play out. They just took so long, so many years to get rid of this sort of despot who was taking advantage of people. Again, most people didn't really encounter that, but those that did were quite harmed by it.
Right.
And you know, here's the interesting thing. When I went through seminary during my imperatorship of Temple Tahuti, and then afterwards as well, then training at a Anglican church as a priest and everything, what I did notice was so much was the same in the church world, in the mainstream church world, but they also had developed a whole ton of ways of dealing with spiritual life in a spiritual community that we really could learn from. So there's almost like, I think, this in-between ground between mystery schools and magical orders and mainstream churches that we need to come to for creating spiritual homes for ourselves.
I think that the original Rosicrucians were already monks. Like, so that's the
myth, yeah.
They knew, well, yeah, or the archetype. They knew the rules of Saint Benedict. They knew, you know, how to be focused and disciplined and focused on spirituality. So if you take someone like that and then introduce them to the mysteries, then there's a lot that you don't need to tell them because they already know. Like, I don't know, something like that.
But at the same time, like, and I have no training or experience in sex magic whatsoever, and I don't think you actually have much either, not from the Golden Dawn, right? You guys didn't get into that. Like, yeah, it's never been curriculum. To me, it makes sense that stuff is there for people to work with who want to work with it and who are working with people who can work with it, right? But it would be such a tricky thing to regulate,
right?
For not just a large group, but just for people who, oh my God, it's just so, I mean, sex is personal, right? I mean, there's a lot of organizations. When I was teaching at Isis Oasis Retreat Center in California, I mean, there was this group called the Human Awareness Institute, and we weren't allowed to go in the huge temple, about a little bit smaller actually than Temple of Isis, you know, in LA, and a bit bigger than Temple Tahuti. The big temple there was actually built by the Baha'i as their first temple in North America when they came to North America to escape persecution. And we weren't allowed in, and the sounds that came out of there, like, it was definitely 100 people doing experimental sexual work with each other. And they'd come down to the pavilion to have dinner and lunch and stuff, and some of them would barely be dressed, just wearing like a little loincloth and laughing.
They're not Baha'i though. It was built by the Baha'i.
This was Human Awareness Institute. And it's actually run, I believe, by the daughter or niece of Alan Watts, and all based on his teachings. So it's very interesting stuff. Yeah.
I love some Alan
Their
Watts.
application form asks, like, do you have any open sores on the outside of your body? Stuff like that, because they get into it, as far as I know. That would be really interesting to hear more about that sort of stuff, but you didn't get to glimpse inside of that. And there are large groups of people, I think, exploring that kind of stuff in the spiritual world, especially in the sort of hybrid middle ground between yoga and Eastern mysticism and then Western techniques. There's a lot of schools and movements now that deal with sort of an integration of East and West techniques. I mean, the Golden Dawn was an integration of East and West techniques anyway, as we well know. I was just
There's
talking
that
with a
Japanese cult that was poisoning. What were they doing? Something blowing up bombs in a subway. They were all about combining East and West. I mean, you know.
that's what are you talking about?
The old
Japanese,
Japanese
cult.
Yeah. They had like Christianity and Vajrayana side by side, and then let's blow up subways. It's weird.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you can do anything you want when you're a cult leader.
Yeah, apparently.
I'm going to plug this in here and then turn it upside down and quote, why is it escaping me? What's that book of the Bible with all the rules? Leviticus. I'm going to quote Leviticus a lot and talk about Joshua knocking down the walls of Jericho. And when,
those poor people, imagine being at the grocery store in Jericho,
right?
And then like all these hill tribes calling themselves the 12 after the planets, and show up and are like, "Yo, you're all dead." Like, talk about some sort of paramilitary invasion of hill tribes. That stuff was definitely written by the victors.
Right. Yeah. The whole Tower card initiation is kind of
back to an initiation.
Right.
The struggle, like, so one of the things I talk with a lot about people, and again, this is all your fault that I'm doing this. I blame you entirely, and I say this regularly. As I go to lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul will keep. If I should die before I wake, I know it's Edward's soul I blame. Because a lot of people are doing these rituals. Like I have independent students that are like, they're getting up every day and doing the LBRP, the middle pillar, the BRH with analysis of the keyword. Then they're doing it like an SIRP, and then they're doing like some other advanced working. And I'm just like, holy shit, like you're really seriously doing this. So it must be giving things to you in your life. Like you must be getting stuff out of it. And they're like, hell yeah. I'm like, well, that's amazing. That's amazing. And then the question for me is, how can I help you get more? Or what can I help you get at all? One of the things I think that will happen, which happened to me doing the Donald Michael Craig system before I joined the order, was I kept hitting these walls, because it was like there was a mixture of things that I was missing and not actually doing steps. Like I didn't think that learning the Hebrew alphabet was an important step. That's wrong, right? There's other rituals I think you might take less seriously, like meditation 1, which may not be the best ritual in the world, but it's basically transcendental meditation via the cloud of unknowing, with a bit of extra stuff that you can actually see written out even clearer form by Franz Barden in his Der Weg zum wahren Adepten, the initiation into Hermetics, most mistranslated title in history. So like all of these things are quite similar, and people who are doing it independently outside of an initiatory, like there's a big difference when you don't have the initiation to initiate you into the symbolism of the rituals you're then going to use, right? Like by names and images are all powers awakened and reawakened. But if you're not introduced to those names and images, you have to sort of create them for yourselves, because you don't have this momentous event that defines what they mean to you, and then a group of people to all explain what they meant to them, what they went through, and then you will study it together while recreating it in micro forms through doing various rituals and ceremonies all the time.
Yeah.
So a big question for me is, in how can I help people get the most of these traditions and even perhaps self-initiate? Well, no self-initiation is going to be like an order initiation. That's just a fact, right? But I believe that there is still the same kind of spiritual progress doing it yourself. And I'm sort of curious
and there's
what you think about that.
Well, I mean, on one hand, there's more danger of misunderstanding something or getting in the habit of doing something incorrectly, but there's also no risk whatsoever of the interpersonal or political or hierarchical bullshit that one often finds in cults. So it's kind of like a take it or leave it. Like if somebody really doesn't want that dynamic, or they don't want to enter into that weird groupthink thing, then self-initiation is the way. But if somebody wants accuracy, like if they're just like, they want the best possible, version of the training, then they would probably want to join and go through all the grades of each of the main 4 or 5 orders or something like that. Like, then there's people like that, I've seen people like that, But yeah, it's just, I think it's the personality, it's personal choice, or what people can handle. Thank you, very honored Frater RC, for being my guest today on the Esoterinerd podcast, even as I was your guest on the Magic Without Fears podcast. Special thanks to Susumu Ueda and his father and the other monks at Jofuku-in Temple on Mount Koyasan for the music you're hearing right now. Special thanks to Camille and Kennerly for the Game of Thrones intro and outro to the interview. And special thanks to Brian Dahl, that's Bryindall, because I think we'll end this episode with one of his performances of Golden Dawn Magic. The opening by Watchtower. Stay tuned as part 2 of this 2-part conversation with Frater RC will air in the next few days. We'll close with some Brian Dahl. Thank you all for tuning in, and talk to you soon. Good night.
I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. I am the first, I am the last. I am he that liveth and was dead. Behold, I am alive forevermore, and hold the keys of hell and death. For I know that my Redeemer liveth and standeth in the latter day upon the earth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto thy Father but by me. I am the purified. I have passed through the gates of darkness into the light. I have fought upon the earth for good. I have finished my work. I have entered into the invisible. every spirit of the firmament and of the ether, upon the earth and under the earth, on dry land and in the water, of whirling air and of rushing fire, and every spell and scourge of God the vast one may be obedient unto me.